control the vertical.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthologic with your host Mark. This particular episode is a landmark. It is essentially my last episode covering what I'd consider the phase one of Anthology, which is I've been going through every single anthology series that I think is appropriate for the sort of criteria I've set, with a few exceptions, sometimes I diverge off. And I think I've come to the end of that. Now, there will still be phase one episodes in the future because there are new shows coming out all the time, new anthology shows coming out all the time, and there's ones I've yet to uncover, and there's the odd one where I've just not been able to source a single episode, and if they turn up, I can come back to them. So this isn't the very last episode of phase one, but it's the last official, if you like. Any others after this will be as new stuff becomes available. But I think I've covered everything I intended to cover on this fairly lengthy project in terms of new anthology shows. Obviously, I weaved in things like The Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, and Outer Limits within that. And I will be returning to those as part of phase two anyway. Well, not the Night Gallery, I've covered that entirely, but certainly The Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits. So, yes, but I have specifically put this one to one side for the one I'm about to do to one side for various reasons. A, it doesn't quite fit, but it kind of does. But B, I think it's kind of a landmark in terms of culture. Because I'm covering Casino Royale, the first ever dramatised James Bond, visually dramatised James Bond story. This was adapted and presented as live in 1954 on a TV series, anthology series called Climax. And for this episode, they adapted James Bond, Casino Royale. This, I believe, was episode 3 of Climax, and there aren't any earlier ones, so I'm kind of sticking to that rule. It's the earliest one I could find, and it kind of is available on YouTube. A few others are, and there's some other kind of interesting one within the Climax series. But this one obviously has a bigger cultural sort of importance because, as I say, it's the first time someone took on the character of James Bond and it was broadcast. And for that reason, the rights to Casino Royale were not easily available to the sort of makers of the main James Bond franchise. In fact, there was that weird 1967 Casino Royale film because someone else had the rights, they could make it, and finally they acquired the rights, and there was eventually a Casino Royale movie. However, this was the first one. This one is heavily adapted for American TV. James Bond is American in this, Jimmy Bond, in fact. However, some of the beats of the story are out of the novel. They've not strayed too far. Barry Nelson is the man playing Jimmy Bond. Not a great casting. Okay casting, I would say. However, Le Chiffre is cast and played by Peter Lorre, who's a much more interesting sort of actor and quite a good match for Le Chiffre, who's kind of a shifty, weird, threatening character throughout the book. However, I have to say, I think Peter Lorre is coming across as a bit bored in this. He's not kind of giving it his usual full-on self. There was also there was various other alterations. For example, in the original novel, James Bond is assisted by Felix Leiter, the American CIA agent. In this version, he's supported by Clarence Leiter, who is working for the British Secret Service. So he becomes the Englishman in this story. And the character of Rene Mathis is changed considerably to be a character called Valerie Mathis, who is a love interest of Bond, but also under the thumb of Le Chiffre, and he's using her to sort of get to Bond and stuff like that. Linda Christian put in a good performance here as Valerie Mathis. She is absolutely beautiful, so that helps. And, you know, there's a bit of to and fro. Now, this is a 50-odd minute production, fairly long text, and basically the action kind of starts almost halfway through the novel. There's an attempt on Bond's life, and it opens with that, so it opens dramatically. And so on. And we get various shenanigans. We get Clarence Leiter and James Bond talking about what they got to do to bring Le Chiffre down, the reasons. Again, quite similar to those in the book. Basically, he's being run by communist money, and they've got to try and bankrupt him to force communists out of France is kind of the thing. What's going on here? But he's supported by Russia, Smersh, and, well, I don't think Smersh is mentioned, but sort of that's the implication. And they want to try and break him he's trying to win money back through gambling, and James Bond's got to go up against him, playing the game Baccarat. So there's some interesting scenes, for example, of James Bond explaining the rules of Baccarat while Clarence Leiter goes through the plan, and they're backing and forthing. So again, not far from the book, there is a section in the book where James Bond does explain the rules of Baccarat. So yeah, it was kind of appropriate to that, and it was kind of fun. I imagine this was quite a successful presentation when it came out. I have to laugh that CBS paid Ian Fleming $1,000 to adapt Casino, yeah, which doesn't sound much, but that's equivalent to $11,000, I think, in today's money. Still not that much, really, is it? But yeah. So yeah, but unfortunately, that meant that they kind of acquired the rights. So yeah. I kind of liked it. Apparently, when it was first telecast, it was in colour, which is amazing for 54. But the only surviving copies are recordings using a black and white device called a kinematoscope. So that's the only one we've got available. It is in the public domain now, so it is on YouTube. And it's kind of interesting. As I say, I think Barry Nelson isn't quite the James. I don't know. I'm not sure in the 50s who could have played this. I'm not familiar with American TV actors from this era, you see. I'd only think of people from movies, and that wouldn't be on TV. So, mind you, they got Peter Lorre, so maybe. But it's weird that they've kind of twisted it into this. They got a love interest, which is kind of cool. So that makes Linda Christian basically the first Bond girl before Ursula Andress, in a way. So, yeah. I believe from the outcome of this is that there was a plan to have a TV show about James Bond. Fleming actually agreed to this and wrote some short stories that got published that were some outlines for some of the stories. And I believe this might have sort of rolled into his interest in writing something for Spies for TV, which was kind of because he was heavily involved in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. franchise, Napoleon Solo and so on. So it may have kind of influenced that. I haven't found out much about that, but I do know some of the background of Man from U.N.C.L.E., and I would not be a bit surprised. So yeah, there's some interesting. There's even some elements in this which surface in the 2006 movie, you know, some vulnerabilities around Bond, which is kind of interesting. It's worth a look. I mean, it's 50 minutes, it's worth a look. As I say, it's a shame Peter Lorre wasn't more fully pantomime evil. He was a bit, but he felt a little disinterested in what was going on. Now, it could be it was just an off night, because this is a live production. It's possible. But yeah, it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun. And worth a look. So Casino Royale. That caps phase one. As I mentioned earlier, this caps phase one of Anthologic. So I hope you enjoyed it. So the next phase, I'll be doing deeper dives into series. So the episodes will drop less frequently, probably monthly, maybe even every other month. But there will be either an entire season or half a season or 10 episodes. I'm not going to do a 22 episode thing in one show, for example, but I may do, a 10 episode run, if there are such things, or I'm going to split them up appropriately. So we'll see how that goes. I also intend to have more guests on, so it won't be just me solo speaking about things. So I'm hoping to have shows where I've got a guest on talking about a particular series. And indeed, the next, I'll whet your appetites. The very first show I'm going to cover in this structure is Inside Number 9, the British comedy horror thriller anthology show that's extremely successful and well regarded too. So that one will be coming next. Anyway, that about winds this up. But before I go, may I ask, is anybody out there?
I'm not.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to